A silver Toyota Camry is moving through traffic in Kovan, Singapore, in the middle of the afternoon on June 10th, 2013. People are going about their day, running errands, picking up their kids, heading home. Then someone looks out of their car window and sees something deeply wrong with the scene. There's a man's body being dragged face down along the road underneath this silver car. The man's belt is caught on the undercarriage, and behind him, there is a trail of blood stretching down the street. Around 15 to 20 people in their cars honk desperately. People try to flag the car down. Nobody can stop the driver. He just keeps going. This is how the Kovan Double Murders were discovered. Not with a body in a dark alley, not in the middle of the night. In broad daylight, on a busy road, in front of dozens of witnesses. And to make it worse, the man behind the wheel was a cop. Let's begin. Officers appeared on the scene and followed the trail of blood. It stretched for over 1 kilometer. At the far end lay the body that had finally become dislodged from the underside of the car. The body of a 42-year-old man with 20 stab wounds, 17 of them to the head, neck, chest, lay outside Kovan Station. Down the road and round the corner, inside a house on Hillside Drive, lay another body. It was an elderly man, 67 years old, with 27 knife wounds. 2 victims. 1 house, a trail of bloody sock prints cutting in a straight line through the home. So what had happened there? The 2 victims were Tan Boon Sin and his son Tan Chee Heong. Tan Boon Sin had co-founded a car workshop called Sok Leon Motor Works. Everyone who knew him, friends, colleagues, and customers, said the same thing. He was a warm man, he was hardworking, he never lost his temper. One of his Malaysian employees remembered how Boon Sin had paid him a full 6 months' salary while he was away caring for his sick wife. No hesitation, no questions asked. His former business partner, who had known him since 1965, said Boon Sin had no vices. He did not drink, smoke, gamble, or womanize. The only thing he liked doing was fishing. His son, Tan Chee Heong, was 42, a university graduate, director, and shareholder of an electronics company called Aspern Singapore. He had 2 sons, aged 10 and 3, and by every account, he was a deeply devoted family man. That afternoon, Chee Heong visited his father's home. He walked into a nightmare, and it cost him his life. As soon as the police were called, they moved fast to catch the killer. And within 2 days, they had a name. The suspect was a 34-year-old senior staff sergeant in the Singapore police force. His name, Iskandar bin Rahmat. And not only had he applied for urgent leave on the day of the murders, he'd also fled the country. After leaving the scene of the crime, he drove the Camry to an area called Eunos, where a rented car was waiting for him. He switched vehicles, drove to his home in Kim Kiat. Then at 11 p.m., he crossed the causeway from Singapore into Johor Bahru, Malaysia, on his scooter. 2 days later, on July 12, plainclothes officers from the Royal Malaysian Police found him sitting at a seafood restaurant in Danga Bay, calmly having a meal. He was arrested and extradited back to Singapore the next day. When the Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore was informed, he publicly thanked the Malaysian police and called it a fine example of cross-border cooperation. Singapore's police commissioner held a press conference. Speaking about the crime, he said it was painful. He said it was a betrayal, and he promised the force would prosecute Iskandar to the fullest extent possible. So, how does a police officer, someone sworn to uphold the law, end up doing something like this? Not much is known about Iskandar bin Rahmat's early life. He was born on February 3rd, 1979. He completed secondary school and enrolled in Singapore Polytechnic, but dropped out after a year. However, his life took a more positive turn after he completed his national service with the Singapore Police Force. He formally decided to join the police force as a corporal in March 1999. And by most accounts, he was a good officer. He served in the Bedok Police Division. He became an investigating officer. The force sponsored his diploma in management and police studies at Temasek Polytechnic, which he completed in 2012. And he received commendations. One resident had written in to praise his handling of a noise complaint. His commanding officer called him the pride of Bedok North NPC. But underneath all that success, Iskandar was drowning in debt. He had married in 2003, and during the marriage, he took out 3 loans from OCBC Bank: a housing loan, a renovation loan, and a car loan. Hundreds of thousands of Singapore dollars. The marriage ended in divorce less than 2 years later. He sold the car and the flat to cover some of his debts and moved back in with his parents and sister, who were living in a 3-room flat in Kim Kiat Avenue. But he was still struggling to pay back the money years later. A creditor's petition to recover the money had been filed against him in October 2012, and he was served with the papers at his own workplace. In January 2013, he failed to make his annual financial declaration, an anti-corruption measure that's mandatory for all civil servants in Singapore. And this triggered disciplinary hearings. He was reassigned to administrative duties, barred from carrying arms, and given 3 months to settle his debts. By June 2013, he still owed the bank over 61,000 Singapore dollars, which is roughly $47,750 US. Iskandar told his disciplinary officer he would borrow money from his cousin to pay the debt, except he did not have a cousin. He made that up. So he had no plan, no ideas, and time was running out. For some reason, he decided to go on a Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca around this time, spending money that his supervisor later pointed out he could have used to pay his debt. Nobody close to him, not his family, not his colleagues, knew the full extent of what was happening. He kept smiling. He kept showing up to work. He kept pretending that everything was perfectly fine. Then he remembered a case he'd worked on a few months prior. Back in November 2012, an elderly man named Tan Boon Sin had filed a police report about the theft of 35,000 Singapore dollars, or roughly 28,000 US dollars worth of valuables from his safety deposit box at Certis Cisco. And Iskandar had been one of the investigating officers before the case was reassigned. During that investigation, he had discovered something that stuck with him. Boon Sin may have lost a significant sum, but he still had valuables worth more than 200,000 Singapore dollars, which is over 159,800 US dollars remaining in that box. So out of desperation, Iskandar formed a plan. He would rob Tan Boon Sin, get the money, pay off the debt, and move on. July 10th, 2013 wasn't just the day of the crime. It was also a deadline. The day he had agreed to repay OCBC Bank 50,000 Singapore dollars, or 40,000 US dollars, to avoid bankruptcy. Iskandar was out of time. He called the old man, introducing himself using the pseudonym Rahman. He claimed to be an intelligence officer who had uncovered a plot to steal from Boon Sin's deposit box. He said it was urgent. Boon Sin needed to go to Certis Cisco immediately, remove all his valuables, and allow a surveillance camera to be installed inside the box to catch the thief. And Boon Sin believed him. He went to Certis Cisco, he withdrew his items. Iskandar installed a dummy camera. He then escorted Boon Sin home in that silver Toyota Camry, pretending the whole way to speak with a partner over what looked like a walkie-talkie. It was just a prop. There was no partner. Once they arrived at the house on Hillside Drive, Boon Sin offered him a drink. Iskandar stayed. He kept pretending to wait for his fictional partner, hoping for a moment that would allow him to grab the cash and run. And that moment never came. Boon Sin had offered him a drink. He had been kind to him, courteous, the way he was with everyone. He had let a stranger into his home and treated him like a guest. And Iskandar had sat there on his sofa, accepting that hospitality, looking for the right moment to steal from him. Suddenly, Iskandar realized that the bag of valuables had moved. He couldn't find it. Panic set in, and then Boon Sin realized that he'd been tricked. What happened in that house over the next 30 minutes was brutal enough that it would be the matter of discussion in court for weeks. According to Iskandar's version of events, Boon Sin eventually saw through the lies and became aggressive. He picked up a knife, and things escalated. Iskandar said he'd killed Boon Sin in self-defense. The court's conclusion was very different. Here's what the evidence showed. Boon Sin, an elderly man, had severely degenerated cartilage in his right knee. He could barely walk properly. He was waiting for a knee operation. The idea that this man could charge at a 34-year-old police officer was, in the judge's own words, simply not believable. Boon Sin sustained 12 stab wounds and 15 incised wounds, 5 to the neck, 7 to the chest, 9 to the face and scalp. There were 4 defensive wounds on his arms and hands. He had fought back. He had tried to survive. He was simply not equipped to fight off his attacker. Then Boon Sin's son, Chee Heong, arrived. He had visited the house completely unannounced. Iskandar had no idea Boon Sin's son would be there that afternoon at all. Chee Heong walked into the house, and he heard someone. Saw his father's body, called out, "Pa!" and ran straight at Iskandar. Iskandar stabbed him too. 7 stab wounds, 13 incised wounds, a deep cut to the neck that severed 3 major blood vessels. Chee Heong staggered out of the house and collapsed near the gate. The car's smart key had fallen from Boon Sin's pocket. Iskandar grabbed it and left. Witnesses saw him get into the Camry and drive away. He ran over Chee Heong's body as he drove through the gates. Chee Heong's belt caught under the vehicle. Iskandar drove, and that is how Chee Heong's body ended up being dragged for over a kilometer, past houses, past traffic, past plenty of witnesses, until it finally fell from the underside of the vehicle outside Kovan station. At trial, Iskandar denied running over Chee Heong deliberately. The judge ultimately accepted he had not used the car as a weapon on purpose. According to Iskandar, he thought the people were honking at him because of bloodstains on the side of his car. He also maintained that the killings were not premeditated. He said he had only ever intended to rob the man and run. He admitted to the stabbings, but argued it was self-defense as a result of a sudden fight. The prosecution dismantled his account piece by piece. The knife he described, which he claimed belonged to Boon Sin, had a blade he verbally described as smooth. The sketch he drew in court showed what appeared to be a serrated knife. None of the knives in the Tan household matched either description, and the murder weapon was never recovered. The trail of bloody sock prints inside the house moved in a straight, linear path. The prosecution argued this showed Iskandar had searched the house for valuables after killing Boon Sin, before Chee Heong even arrived, not that he had been stumbling around in a chaotic fight. Forensic pathologist Dr. Gilbert Lau from the Health Science Authority was direct. The sheer number of wounds concentrated on vital areas of both victims pointed clearly to an intent to kill. When the defense argued that Iskandar had acted in self-defense, Dr. Lau told the court plainly, if Boon Sin had actually attacked Iskandar first, he would have been performing the autopsy on Iskandar instead. On December 4th, 2015, Justice Tae Yong Kwang delivered his verdict, guilty of first-degree murder with the intent to kill, a mandatory death penalty sentence. Justice Tae found that Iskandar had attacked both victims cruelly and relentlessly with a clear intention to kill. He described Chee Heong as collateral damage, killed simply because he had been a witness. He also noted there were 4 separate moments during the robbery where Iskandar could have grabbed the cash and run without harming anyone. He didn't take a single one of those opportunities. Iskandar spent the next decade fighting a sentence through every legal avenue available. On February 3rd, 2017, his 38th birthday, the Court of Appeal dismissed his appeal and upheld the death sentence. The judges called his accounts of events incredible and unbelievable. His clemency petition to the president was denied in 2019. He filed a complaint against his original defense lawyers. It was dismissed, and he appealed it. He even joined challenges against the constitutionality of capital punishment, which was also dismissed. There was a separate lawsuit over whether prison authorities had been forwarding death row inmates' private letters to the Attorney General. The court found that the practice had been unlawful. However, it changed nothing about his sentence. Each legal challenge delayed the execution. Typically, in Singapore, a condemned prisoner is hanged within weeks or months of exhausting their appeals. Iskandar's case dragged on for nearly a decade after sentencing. On February 5th, 2025, 2 days after his 46th birthday, Iskandar bin Rahmat was hanged at Changi Prison. A second clemency petition filed in November 2024 had been rejected by President Tharman Shanmugaratnam. A last-minute application for a stay of execution was dismissed by the Court of Appeal the evening before. It had been nearly 12 years since the murders. In the days after Iskandar was hanged, Boon Sin's daughter spoke to reporters. She said that for 12 years, her family had mostly stayed away from speaking on the topic. They left it to the courts. But she said they hadn't expected the process to take this long. She had taken over her father's car workshop to continue his legacy, she said. And she had become a parental figure to Chee Heong's 2 sons. Boon Sin's widow continued to live in the same house on Hillside Drive, where it all happened. The family hoped to finally move on. A longtime employee at the workshop, a 66-year-old Malaysian man named Asyong, who had worked there since he was in his 20s, said he had never forgotten the loss of his employer. He struggled for 5 or 6 years after the murders and said he was deeply relieved that justice had finally been served. Iskandar's descent was invisible to everyone around him. Debt, shame, desperation, and then he made a decision that destroyed 2 families at once. Boon Sin and Chee Heong were killed in the same afternoon. Chee Heong's boys grew up without their father and their grandfather. Boon Sin's widow spent 12 years waiting for justice in the same house where her husband and son were murdered. Iskandar, the man employed to uphold the law, thought he was going to steal some valuables and walk away. Instead, he killed a father and a son, dragged one of their bodies through the streets, and spent a decade on death row before he was finally executed. Of course, it is true that the people we trust to protect us are still human. And yet, in cases like this, that's the most unsettling truth of all. That is all for today. Let me know your thoughts about this case in the comments, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.